Today, I'm joined by the incredible Jacqueline Gomes-Neves, a social entrepreneur and a political activist. She's born and bred in Brixton, South London, and Jacqueline is passionate about wiping out institutional racism by working within the system. In 2013, she was elected the first female youth mayor of Lambeth Council, working tirelessly to improve the opportunities both in education and employment for disenfranchised young people, not only in her own community, but across the country. In 2019, whilst shadowing the Deputy Prime Minister, she launched Parliament's first ever Intersectionality Forum to raise awareness of minority experiences in Parliament. In July 2015, Jacqueline co-launched a report alongside Baroness Doreen Lawrence and Baroness Jowl to tackle the lack of community confidence in the police. A key recommendation from the report was for every frontline police officer to have a body-worn camera during stop and searches. By October 2016, the Metropolitan Police Service has taken a global lead by initiating the largest rollout of body-worn cameras by the police anywhere in the world. She has also graduated this year from Hull University with a degree in British politics and legislative studies. And that's just a few of her amazing achievements to date, and all before her 24th birthday. As a white British woman, I've been attempting to learn as much as I can about systemic racism and racial injustice, both in the UK and in the US. And I'm particularly passionate that everyone who works at Virgin can be 100% themselves at work and feel truly seen and valued. I've been reading, watching, and talking to people to try and get a deeper understanding of systemic racism, racial injustice, and the need for not only individuals, but institutions to take an anti-racist stance. Jacqueline, thank you so much for taking the time during this moment in history to talk to me. I feel so grateful that I can learn from you and pass this learnings on to as many people as I can.
Thank you, Holly, for taking an interest and I guess for taking a lead on this issue and for wanting to understand more.
Thank you very much. I know it's so great, this movement at the moment. There's so much information out there, and we've just got to make sure that the momentum actually makes change. And because you've seen the moments in history like this before where there has been huge momentum, but when you actually look back, not a huge amount of change happens. And I think it would be wonderful if we can affect change. A few questions for you. The first one is, it's a little bit controversial. Over the last few weeks, I've been posting about Black Lives Matters, and many of the comments I've received have been, Holly, but all lives matter. What would you say is the best way to respond to these comments and help people understand that when people are saying Black Lives Matter, it doesn't mean all lives don't matter?
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, I heard that term, all lives matter. And in all honesty, I thought, yes, all lives do matter. And then the hashtag came around, Black Lives Matter. And then I thought to myself, well, the reality is that if all lives matter, then surely Black lives matter too, right? That's the assumption in a statement like that. But with what we're seeing across the world, with George Floyd triggering the conversation, we're seeing a lot of Black people being, brutally murdered in broad daylight on our phone screens, and not only that, but we're seeing an influx in stories about how people are being mistreated, for the pure reason that their skin color is, more melanated than others. And so the reality is that we live in a society where all lives don't matter. Black lives don't all matter. Mixed race lives don't all matter. And it's not just us, it's, disabilities, it's people with, particular religions. And so all lives don't matter at the moment. And that is something we should work towards. And until Black lives matter and disability lives matter and, other minority groups matter, we can't really say that all lives matter. You can say it and close your eyes to the realities of what's going on in the world, but the reality is that all lives do not matter at the moment. And so until Black lives do matter, that statement, is simply incorrect.
I've just finished reading Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edo-Lodge, and I learnt so much, and at times, especially as a white person, it was really uncomfortable to read. It brought up so many questions for me, and I realised that my knowledge of Black history in the UK was really very basic, and I want to learn more. And this is quite a huge ask for you, but would you be able to talk us through the history of systemic racism in the UK? Because I think it's something that really helps you understand why these movements are happening now.
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert, but, you know, I have done my research over the years. And so I think there are 3 moments that are really, you know, pivotal for me in my understanding of, you know, of institutional racism in the UK. And that moment starts with something that's quite fresh and was quite fresh in the media, which is the Windrush Generation, which, you know, were people who came over here from the Caribbean in, I think the first ship was 1948. So that's post-war, people who are brought, you know, to England to help rebuild the country after war. And then last year, we saw, you know, on the media how these people were absolutely poorly treated by the government and you know, many wrongly deported. And it was a scandal, you know, it was an absolute scandal how our government handled the situation. And at this time, I was actually working in Parliament as an intern, and I thought it was just, it was almost breathtaking how the MPs didn't do proper research into, you know, when MPs received letters and emails, there was a lack of, you know, research and thought going into the responses. It was, you know, let's just get a standard response and send it out. And that led to a lot of improper actions being made and behavior. And a lot of, you know, a lot of what was being said was, oh, you know, well, they're criminals. That's who we're sending back. They're criminals. But with the truth, there are also lies. And a lot of people weren't criminals, but they were being wrongly deported. And then this came out in March 2020 with the independent Windrush Lessons Learned review, where the inspector of constabulary concluded that Theresa May's office showed inexcusable ignorance and thoughtlessness. And so we see there the power of independent review on government decisions, and we also see, we see a lack of proper action and proper thought from our government. And the problem with that is they are the ones who decide what is going on, right? They make the decisions. They are then responsible for the oversight of those decisions being carried out. And if an independent review concluded that, you know, their thoughts and their actions were inexcusably ignorant and thoughtlessness, thought without thought, there's a big problem there. And I think it's part of a bigger problem in the UK. And it's a problem that shows that a lot of the time minorities are taken on to like tick a box or, or to help an organization or an institution look diverse. But the reality is that the moment that heat, is taken off them, it's back to business. And business isn't equal, and business doesn't promote racial equality or other equalities in the very sense of it. And that's the bigger problem we need to address here. Mm-hmm. Another key part of the history of inequality in the UK is the Equality Act. So back in 76, there was the Race Relations Act that was passed in Parliament, and that was then put into the Equalities Act in 2010 with gender, disability, sexual orientation, age, and religion discrimination. So all put under one act, right? And in theory, we've had acts that prohibit discrimination since the 70s, but in practice, it's been a different story. And we have, people are being discriminated, not only on a grassroots level, but in their businesses, in high-end institutions, in sectors that range from politics to business, to the third sector, to finance. And these are things that are happening, and nothing is happening. No sanctions are being applied. The sanctions, they're arbitrary, so no one knows what's really going on. They're ambiguous. So, if someone is in a position to mistreat someone else, there aren't any proper sanctions that they can look to and say, right, I don't really want to do that because I might end up having to face these consequences. There isn't that, and that's very worrying. And so, from a legislative perspective, I want to know, how are the government pursuing their acts, which are written in theory, in practice? How are they implementing these acts and making sure that acts not only work on paper, but in reality and in society where they are actually applied?
Do you think there's a point here about the lack of diversity within Parliament? We've got very few people from ethnic minorities who are MPs, and so their decision-making thinking is not thinking for everybody.
Absolutely, and that is the reason why I got into politics. So when I was 14, I realized that my area, there were a lack of opportunities for young people, and I didn't see it as a big theory. I saw it as something that was very personal to me. So we didn't have Wi-Fi at home. My mom, was a cleaner, still is. And, she worked really hard to kind of put me through education, to fund, what I needed, whether that was books, a laptop. And Wi-Fi was just not part of her budget. So I used the local computers in my youth club. And during the cuts of 2012, I believe under Cameron, the computers had all broken, and no one was, they weren't being attended to. And, we suffered because I no longer had a computer to do my to do my homework on. That was affecting my education. And then I put together a petition and took it to the local council. I was then encouraged by my friends to run to be the youth mayor. When I ran to be the youth mayor, I had realized that there was actually 6 males before me, and there had never been a female youth mayor to represent Lambeth, which is a really diverse borough. And then I realized that in politics, there are a lot of issues around the lack of representation for women, the lack of representation for minorities, people with disabilities. And that's a problem. It's a problem because these are the people who are on the decision-making tables that will trickle down and affect everyone else in society. Society is, well, especially in London, very multicultural and diverse, and not just diverse in the racial sense, but diverse in cultural capital, in working differences, etc., in employment. And so when we have a particular group who are very the same around the table that makes very important decisions, what happens is that we have decisions on the ground that don't actually cater to the people that in theory they're supposed to cater to. And that's a problem. That's a very big problem. It's a problem we've been facing for many years now. And it's something that really needs to be addressed. And that's why I kind of pursued politics as a degree. And then I did my internship last year. But even then, I faced discrimination in my own office by a man who I don't think was ready. I don't think he had ever seen, a young female from a minority background with knowledge and confidence. I don't think he understood that. But the result was that he kind of penalized me socially and excluded me and really said some horrible things, referring to cotton fields and how shouldn't be mixing certain flowers in cotton fields, and that's how the purity of the land's taken away, etc. And that's the microaggressions that discrimination takes form in, right? It's not always necessarily the overt slander or racial slurs, especially in the workplace. It's the undertones, it's the mannerisms, the micro stuff, and that that really counts. And it really impacts on people's mental health. I wasn't feeling very good last year. I did start writing, which was a good thing, but it really impacted on me. And now I'm no longer pursuing a career in politics.
I was about to ask that question. I was about to say, I hope it hasn't put you off.
It really did, Holly. It really did. I remember, like, I've worked from the age of 14. It's been my life mission to change the world. And then I realized that, okay, I couldn't change the world in Lambeth, but going to Parliament, maybe there was something I could change there. And being in a room where I felt so out of place was just horrible.
What system change do you believe needs to happen in Britain to stamp out racism and for us as a nation to become truly anti-racist?
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe it's a whole system shift. We need a shift in mentality, and we need a combination of agency and structure to kind of compel these changes. So as we were saying before, legislation in terms of structure, we need legislation that is properly acted upon, has proper independent, systems of accountability, so that when these rules are broken, there are clear penalties to deter the perpetrators of these terrible things. So that structure from a structural sense, but also agency. We need more individuals who are willing to stand up and be agents of change. So people like you coming out and talking and, and exploring and understanding, and then going back to their organizations and saying, right, this is what I've learned. These are the actions I'm now going to take. And it's not just an action outside of business. It's we're going back to business and we're taking these actions with us long term.
There's been many wonderful moments in the past like the one now, but no sort of real change has happened. And I'd be really interested to know from you, especially because of your work in Parliament, are there any actions that us as individuals can take right now to help bring about change in the UK?
Absolutely. My ethos is that every action matters. Every word, every action, every individual counts to create change, and all of it really does matter. So in terms of tangible things, I would say building relationships. People should be encouraged, I believe, to build more relationships out of their own social circles. Create relationships beyond generations, beyond economic status, because those are the relationships that will educate you, give you a different perspective, give you an edge in your work, but also create a cohesion that can create something much larger than that action and relationship in itself.
What should businesses be doing, and why should all businesses be aiming for a truly diverse workforce?
So I think in terms of the why, there's a book by it's called Diversify, I believe, by the head of the BBC Diversity at the moment. What's her name?
Oh, June Sarpong.
June Sarpong.
It's a brilliant book.
So that book answers the case why, the case for, from a business perspective. But in terms of what people, leaders can be doing in business, I think there are three key things from my perspective. So being more open as leaders, being more willing to take on new ideas from different employees, and also introducing long-term reverse mentoring. So I have a colleague, a friend at KPMG who took part in a reverse mentoring scheme over there. And, he was working with a partner, etc. And he's learned so much from that experience, but the partner has also taken a lot in terms of his experience as an employee, his experience as a Black, a minority ethnic employee, and his experience as a younger employee. And I think those things are very valuable in terms of adapting and moving forward and ensuring that you're catering to your employees' needs so that they can perform to the best of their abilities. So vulnerability from leaders, admitting when you're wrong, not being afraid to have a bit of that vulnerability, admitting when you're wrong, and being open to a culture of education and learning, so that your employees and the people who are on the receiving end of your services can see, okay, you know, they're open, they're willing to be educated, you know, so can I. I'm not too high to do that, you know. I think that's quite important. And also from a recruitment perspective, not only recruiting, but also understanding how you can retain, you know. And that's back to how can I cater to my employees' needs? How can I ensure that they feel comfortable enough to do their job? And that takes exploration and some other steps within that. And yeah, from an individual perspective, not pulling up the ladder behind you and sponsoring someone else, you know, mentoring someone else, identifying talent underneath you and saying, look, this is how I can help you. And just being kind and understanding to the person sitting beside you, common courtesy. And, you know, it doesn't matter if the change isn't big. It doesn't matter if what you're doing will not cover the tabloids or the newspapers. All that matters is that you take a first step, because the first step towards the right direction is better than no step. And tiny steps eventually create a big change.
So well said. Thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been really interesting. And